She made me write vows I never got to say because she played a recording of her own instead. I remember the way my hands felt clammy and slightly shaky as I perched on the edge of a velvet couch in the small anteroom meant for the bride, even though I was the groom. Outside the door, muffled music and voices rose in gentle waves. People laughing, glasses clinking, the faint echo of a violin warming up. Everything was arranged precisely as my fiancée Alexandra had always described. White drapery, elegant centerpieces, pastel roses woven into an arch overlooking a decorative pond. It should have felt like a dream come true, the culmination of our 4-year journey together. Instead, it felt more like a trap. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest that I wondered if someone in the hallway could hear it through the wooden door. In my pocket, I had carefully folded sheets of paper containing the wedding vows I'd spent weeks writing. My entire soul was poured into those pages, but at that moment, I had an inexplicable dread that maybe I would never get to read a single line of them out loud. Rewind to 4 years earlier. I was a 20-something student, working part-time in a tiny, slightly antiquated bookstore, the kind with shelves that nearly touched the ceiling and a persistent scent of old paper and fresh coffee. It was late spring when Alexandra walked in wearing a casual sundress. She had this luminous blonde-brown hair cascading over her shoulders, and large, inquisitive blue eyes that made her look both self-assured and a little lost. She asked whether we had a particular book about the history of modernist architecture. I could still picture her standing there, the late afternoon light sneaking through the tall windows and catching in her hair, making it look as though it were spun from gold. From the very first moment I laid eyes on her, I felt a kind of gravitational pull toward her, as though the rest of the room had vanished, and it was just the two of us, locked in a silent dialogue that no one else could interrupt. I helped her locate the book, some old monograph we'd somehow ended up stocking. When I handed it over, she gave me a smile so genuine it seemed to radiate a kind of gentle warmth straight into my chest. We started to chat, first about that architecture volume, then about art in general, and eventually about life, travel, and our shared fascination with heritage sites. She jotted her number down on a tiny slip of paper decorated with doodles, and from that moment, we fell headlong into a whirlwind of dates, cozy cafes, museum visits, spontaneous walks along the river at night. Our chemistry was instantaneous, a flash of recognition that seemed to promise something extraordinary. Over the next 6 months, I discovered so many intriguing layers to Alexandra's personality. She was intensely curious, with an adventurous streak that led her to explore forgotten chapels or obscure local legends in small towns far from the usual tourist routes. In the beginning, I saw nothing except the brilliance of her spirit. Her occasional disappearances, where she'd vanish from my life for 2 or 3 days without warning, only made me think of her as a free spirit. I told myself this was part of her creative nature, something I should not try to tame. When she returned, always with a mysterious explanation, I would shrug off the pang of worry in my gut. I loved her so fully that I was willing to ignore those little red flags, choosing to see only the bright, dazzling aspects of her personality. By our 2nd year together, we shared a small but cozy apartment. It was an exciting time, with both of us finishing studies and diving into new job opportunities. I recall one time we spent the entire weekend painting the walls a soft, muted teal color that she insisted best captured the color of peace. That was Alexandra in a nutshell. Every choice she made was laced with meaning, a sense of artistry and purpose. She could talk at length about how color theory influenced moods, or why a certain lamp in the corner of the room shifted the entire energy of a space. It was endearing. It made me feel I was with someone special, someone who saw the world in deeper hues. Yet there was another side to her, something more aloof and guarded. When her mother Maria swept into our lives, I realized exactly where Alexandra might have learned to hide her more controlling tendencies. Maria was a force of nature, headmaster of a private school and blessed with an iron will. The very first time we met, she shook my hand and asked me a rapid-fire series of questions about my background, career prospects, and intentions with her daughter. Though I tried to remain polite, I felt as if I were in a job interview, not meeting a future mother-in-law. Whenever we visited her for dinner, I sensed a persistent undercurrent of suspicion in the way she looked at me. She had a polite smile, but her gaze said, "I'm not convinced you are good enough for Alexandra." Meanwhile, my fiancé vacillated between absolute devotion to her mother's opinions and moments of quiet rebellion, particularly when her mother questioned her creative dreams. Witnessing that dynamic made me want to protect Alexandra, and also made me realize how deeply her mother's expectations were woven into her psyche. Despite these tensions, my love for Alexandra only grew. She could be radiant, especially when we traveled around Europe, visiting small towns known for specific architectural gems, Art Nouveau churches, centuries-old libraries, or half-ruined medieval towers. She was in her element on those trips, eagerly snapping photos, sketching elaborate facades, confiding in me all the while about how she wanted to create something equally timeless in her architectural work. In those moments, I remember telling myself I was the luckiest man alive to be by her side. It was inevitable, I supposed, that I would eventually propose. The actual proposal took place in our kitchen, after we'd returned from a trip during which she had seemed especially vibrant and happy. I'd toyed with elaborate scenarios, popping the question in a cobblestone piazza under a glowing sunset, maybe. But in the end, I asked her when we were both in pajamas, too tired to do anything but share a cup of late-night tea. Her reaction was heartfelt. She stared at me in wide-eyed surprise, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, and nodded eagerly before throwing her arms around me. It was intimate, authentic, and filled me with an unshakable belief that our bond was unique and unbreakable. Little did I know that our engagement would open the floodgates for the controlling impulses that lurked beneath the surface, both from Alexandra herself and from her mother. The entire wedding planning process felt like a crash course in recognizing how overshadowed I was becoming in what was supposed to be a shared celebration. Maria inserted herself into every decision. She accompanied us to meeting halls, insisted on tasting half a dozen wedding cakes, and had strong opinions on the exact color scheme that would best represent their family. Meanwhile, Alexandra focused on another major aspect, the vows. Even before we started booking venues, she announced, "I want us to write our own vows, sincere, deeply personal vows. I want to hear what's in your heart, and I want to read it in your words." She made it sound so romantic. Her insistence that I should pour my soul onto the page gave me goosebumps in the best way, at least initially. Writing romantic pieces had always come naturally to me. I liked the idea of expressing the depth of my love in a way that was more meaningful than reciting standard lines. But then I began noticing how she kept subtly pressing me. "Have you written them yet? Make sure they reveal your truest feelings. Promise me you'll put everything in there." Her curious emphasis on seeing or knowing exactly what I was going to vow started to feel a bit off. I still assumed it was merely a sign of her excitement, her desire for closeness. I told myself it was sweet that she cared so much about every detail, right down to the precise words I'd speak to her on our wedding day. As we reached the final weeks before the ceremony, I found myself immersed in a flurry of tasks, booking the string quartet, coordinating with caterers, finalizing the floral arrangements, negotiating table placements. At every turn, Maria was there, telling me what was appropriate for their family status and criticizing or redirecting my efforts. My own parents stayed in the background, trusting my choices, but they often looked concerned as I recounted how every detail was being micromanaged. "As long as you're happy," my mother would say gently, but I could sense her worry. My best friend, Igor, took me aside multiple times to ask if I was sure everything was okay. "You look exhausted. Are you sure you're not losing yourself in someone else's big day?" he would ask, only half joking. But I pressed on. Love makes you do that. I wanted Alexandra to be overjoyed with the wedding we were creating. Each night, after finishing the endless to-do list, I would stay awake writing the vows on my laptop. At first, I tried a poetic structure, but that felt forced. Then I shifted to a deeply personal stream of consciousness style, recounting important memories. The first time I saw her reading an art book by the dim light of a single lamp, the sound of her laughter when we danced in our pajamas to an old jazz record, the tears in her eyes at a remote chapel in the south of France. I poured out everything I loved about her. Then I made promises to stand by her side when she struggled, to celebrate her successes, to never stifle her creativity. They were raw, vulnerable declarations of love. At one point, I worried I was giving too much of myself away in these vows. But love is about giving, I reminded myself, so I persevered. One evening, as we sat finishing dinner, I asked, "How are your vows coming along? Could we share a few lines with each other to see if they flow well?" She gave me a tight-lipped smile and shook her head. "I want mine to be a surprise," she said. "Yours will be perfect, I'm sure. I know how expressive you can be. Just trust me." Something about that response put a lump in my throat. Why was I the only one making visible progress, while she remained so secretive? However, I pushed down my doubts. Perhaps she wanted a dramatic reveal on the wedding day. A week before the big day, we held a dinner for our closest friends and family members. At that gathering, I was cornered by Alexandra's old friend, Mikhail. He was someone she knew from her teenage years. I quickly detected an undercurrent of tension between us, and soon realized that he might have once been more than just a friend. During the dinner, Mikhail kept making these passive-aggressive jokes, alluding to a time when Alexandra could twist anyone around her little finger. He laughed it off, saying, She always had a way of getting exactly what she wanted, then giving me a pointed look as if challenging me to deny it. My gut twisted in discomfort. Afterward, I tried bringing it up with Alexandra, but she waved it away. He's just jealous. Don't let it bother you. To add to my unease, her best friend, Nadia, approached me toward the end of the evening. She appeared uncomfortable, shifting her weight between her feet as she spoke softly. You're wonderful, Everyone can see how devoted you are to Alexandra. But be careful. I think she's put a lot of pressure on you to write those vows, and I'm not sure it's just for romance. When I pressed for details, Nadia clammed up, saying only, I don't want to overstep. Just keep in mind that she expects a lot from you. Nadia's reluctance to elaborate made me more anxious. I could feel something was brewing, but I was still in denial, certain that Alexandra's intentions had to be good. We were in love, after all. Finally, the wedding day arrived. The morning was a blur. I got ready in a nearby hotel suite with Igor and a couple of other close friends. I could hardly eat because of the nerves and the hollow feeling in my stomach. Igor tried to reassure me, telling me I looked great in my tailored black suit, that everything would be fine, and that any last-minute jitters were normal. But there was an unspoken tension in the air I couldn't ignore. Something felt off, like a voice at the back of my mind was telling me to be on guard. Still, I told myself this was just standard wedding day nerves. I tried to refocus on the positive. Soon, Alexandra and I would pledge our lives to each other in front of all our loved ones. The ceremony setting was genuinely beautiful. Rows of white chairs lined a grassy area overlooking a small pond. A flowery arch created a soft frame for the altar, while a string quartet softly played classical tunes. When Alexandra appeared at the end of the aisle in her flowing white gown, she looked so serene and graceful that my breath caught in my chest. For a few seconds, every worry drifted away, replaced by the warmth of seeing her approach me, a bright promise in her eyes. This is what I had worked for. Through stress and frustration, this moment of shared commitment, everything progressed smoothly for a while. The officiant gave a short speech about how we met, weaving a gentle little narrative. People laughed at some anecdotes, and my parents dabbed at their eyes with tissues. Then, with a proud smile, the officiant turned to me and said, "Now the groom has prepared vows from the heart." She was cut off when Alexandra leaned in, whispering something quickly in the officiant's ear. The officiant seemed taken aback, fiddled with her script, and cleared her throat awkwardly. "We have a slight change in the order," she announced. "Our bride would like to share her words first, in a special format. Please direct your attention to the screen." I remember standing there, blinking in confusion, holding the pages of my own vows so tightly that they crinkled. The overhead lights dimmed a bit, and a video began to play. First, there was a slideshow of photos of Alexandra, childhood pictures, her college graduation, a few snapshots of her traveling. Then, an audio track started. Alexandra's voice, recorded in advance. The music quieted, and her voice echoed across the small speaker system. "My future husband," she began, in a tone that was part affectionate, part commanding. "I've waited a long time to share these words with you. You must be ready to give me everything I need to feel safe, to feel elevated. You must never waver in supporting my aspirations. I expect you to show me every day that you cherish who I am." It went on like that, less a traditional expression of love and more a list of requirements and expectations. She mentioned the kind of emotional support she needed, the ways she wanted her husband to nurture her ambitions, the patience she hoped to receive whenever she felt restless. But there was no reciprocal promise, no explicit vow of what she would do for me, how she would uplift me. I glanced around, seeing my friends' faces in polite confusion, but they were mostly politely enthralled because it sounded so dramatic and unique. A few guests clapped at certain lines, as if it were a performance. Meanwhile, my heart sank to the pit of my stomach. Suddenly, I realized that I might never get to read my own vows, the ones I had poured so much honesty into. Sure enough, the moment her recording ended, the officiant clapped her hands together and said, "What a beautiful sentiment from our bride. Let's give her a round of applause." Everyone joined in, politely or enthusiastically. But the entire plan I had in my head, speaking my truth right there, gazing into Alexandra's eyes, disappeared in that rapturous wave of applause. By the time the crowd quieted, music swelled again, and I stood there in stunned silence. My name wasn't even mentioned. Nobody gestured for me to step forward with my papers. I just kept waiting. But the officiant hurriedly moved the ceremony along, introducing another segment. It was as if the script had been changed at the last minute and my voice was no longer relevant. I felt gutted. We walked back down the aisle afterward, and all these people were congratulating us, hugging and cheering. Alexandra was smiling like she'd pulled off a fabulous show. For me, it felt as though I'd awakened into a nightmare. I was forcibly reminded of what Nadia and Mikhail had hinted, that Alexandra wanted my devotion, but she wasn't prepared to give me equal space. I tried to approach her immediately, but she was swallowed up in a swirl of relatives, and there was no chance for a private conversation. Soon we were shepherded into a grand dining hall for the reception, a beautifully decorated space complete with lavish floral arrangements, a stage for a band, and carefully laid tables. I ended up at the table of honor next to Alexandra, but she was flanked by her mother on the other side. The entire time, Maria kept fussing with her daughter's hair or dabbing at her lipstick, ignoring me except for the occasional glare that implied she blamed me for something invisible. By the time we reached the first break in the schedule, the time when a couple might typically stand and say a few words to the guests, I'd managed to corner Alexandra in a side hallway. My voice came out trembling with emotion as I confronted her. "What happened out there?" I demanded, holding up the crumpled pages of vows. "We planned to read our vows in front of everyone. Why didn't you let me speak?" She avoided eye contact, fiddling with the lace sleeve of her gown. "It seemed more fitting to share my thoughts through a recorded message first," she said briskly. I wanted to set the tone. I blinked, my cheeks flushing. "But I spent weeks writing mine, rewriting them, exactly because you wanted them so heartfelt. Did you read them already? Did you sneak onto my laptop or phone?" That thought chilled me. She sighed, as though I were the one making a scene. "I needed to be sure of your feelings," she said. "Your total commitment. I knew you'd put everything into them. This was for us, not just for the guests." I stared at her, a flood of heartbreak and confusion swamping me. "But you never even gave me a chance to read them to you. What's the point of vows if one partner doesn't let the other speak?" Her eyes grew cold. "We'll figure it out later. Can you calm down? Everyone's waiting to celebrate." She turned away, more concerned about the next stage of the reception than my shattered sense of dignity. I stumbled back to the main hall and sat at the table, half listening to the clink of glasses and the lively chatter. Igor caught sight of my expression and came over. "What is it?" he whispered. I gave him a short explanation of what transpired. His eyes darkened with anger, but I could see he was trying not to upset me further. "Look, man," he said quietly, "you still have the microphone if you want it. But if this woman you're marrying can't see why you're hurt, maybe you need to think bigger than this immediate moment." I felt close to tears, but I nodded. My head was spinning with questions about whether I really knew Alexandra, whether she'd always been manipulative in ways I missed because I was too in love to see them. When at last the MC announced that the groom might want to say something, a hush fell over the room. My heart pounded so hard it was painful. I stood up slowly, holding the vow pages in front of me. I could see Alexandra at the head table, fiddling with her napkin and refusing to meet my eye. Her mother had an air of forced composure about her, staring me down as though to warn me not to ruin the day. My pulse roared in my ears. I began hesitantly. "I wrote these vows thinking they would be part of the ceremony, something we'd share right when we promised our lives to each other. But as you all saw, it turned out differently." My voice cracked slightly. "So, I'll be honest, I can't read them now. Not because I don't love Alexandra, but because that moment was taken from me in a way that I still don't fully understand." A few guests fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. I heard someone murmur to a neighbor, "What's going on?" I pressed on, ignoring the pounding in my chest. "I wrote them with my whole heart, but this day isn't unfolding how I thought it would. I'm not even sure if my words matter anymore, because it seems like no one wanted to hear them." I paused, scanning the room. Alexandra raised her eyes for a fraction of a second, looking more angry than remorseful. Suddenly, an electric jolt of realization shot through me. If I read them now, it would be performing for an audience that was already half confused and half oblivious. If I didn't read them, I'd be stepping away from the single moment that was supposed to matter most. I swallowed a lump in my throat. "I'm sorry, everyone," I concluded. "I hope you can still enjoy yourselves tonight. But for me, right now, I just need a moment." With that, I stepped away from the microphone, leaving the pages still tucked under my arm. Chaos ensued. Some guests tried to lighten the mood by clapping politely. A few approached me with comforting words or awkward comments. Maria looked incensed, as if she were ready to drag me aside and lecture me for disgracing her family. The music resumed. The lights twirled around the dance floor. And in a bizarre twist, some people simply chose to carry on with the wedding feast as though the drama were a minor glitch. I guess that's what people do in uncomfortable social settings. They try to pretend everything is normal. Eventually, I fled to the small outdoor terrace, longing for fresh air. My tie felt too tight, my head too heavy. The sky had turned a velvety dark blue, and the moon reflected off the pond by the lawn. It was so serene that it felt surreal, given the turmoil churning inside me. Igor found me there, placing a hand on my shoulder without a word. We sat side by side on a low stone ledge, silent for a long time. Finally, I asked quietly, "Am I just being dramatic? Should I have bitten my tongue and read the vows anyway?" He shook his head. "You're the only one who knows what you're feeling. If you believe you can't share those words from the heart after what she did, then you made the right call. Marriage is about mutual respect, not about overshadowing the other person. If she doesn't get that, you can't force her." I nodded, tears blurring my vision. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. All those nights I'd spent bearing my soul on paper. All that love I thought was reciprocated, and she decided to turn our wedding vows into a one-sided performance. A small part of me still wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that she'd meant well, but deep down, I knew there was something deliberate in the way she'd planned it. She had wanted me to write those vows to confirm her own power over me, to ensure that my devotion was unconditional, while she publicly displayed only her side. It made me question everything. The spontaneous trips, the stolen kisses, the nights spent talking until dawn. Were they all underlined by this underlying control dynamic? Eventually, I mustered the courage to go back inside. Music thumped, guests danced. People raised glasses of champagne and toasts I only half heard. Some folks wanted photos with me, trying to preserve a facade that everything was peachy. Others avoided my gaze, probably to escape awkwardness. I spotted Alexandra at a distance, deep in conversation with her mother. They paused occasionally, glancing at me as though they were discussing a complicated logistical problem. For the first time since I'd met her, Alexandra looked almost small and cornered. But when she finally approached me, I saw anger sparking in her eyes more than sorrow. She led me into a side room, stepping carefully over the remnants of decorations. She spoke in a hushed tone that was angry but measured. "You had no right to ruin our wedding." The words made my stomach drop. "Ruin?" I said softly. "What about how you never let me read my vows? The entire plan changed without telling me. You made it all about your voice, your recording." Her expression flickered between frustration and something akin to regret. "I wanted to make a statement," she insisted, "that I have strong expectations for our marriage. You knew that, and for you to stand there, refusing to share the vows you wrote, made it look like we hadn't prepared at all." I let out a sad, bitter laugh. "Prepared? Alexandra, I was more prepared than you can imagine. I had poured every piece of my heart into those words, but reading them after your stunt would be humiliating. It was already humiliating to stand there, cast aside so you could take the spotlight with your pre-recorded demands." Her eyes flashed, and for a moment she seemed speechless. We stared at each other in a silence that spoke of a deep chasm opening up between us. "So what?" she said finally. "Are you just going to leave? Walk away from all these people who came to see us get married?" The directness of her question paralyzed me. The reception was still in full swing. Guests oblivious or turning a blind eye, the dance floor alive with swirling lights, the table spread with expensive food. "Maybe I am," I said hoarsely, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. Because if you can't even acknowledge what this day was supposed to be about, then what kind of partnership are we building? She pressed her lips together, a few tears threatening to fall. I could see that perhaps she had not anticipated the possibility of me calling everything off. I wanted to show everyone how strong and independent we are as a couple," she mumbled, a flash of guilt or confusion in her eyes. "You always said you wanted me to express myself, so I did." I shook my head. "There's a difference between expressing yourself and silencing your partner." She had no immediate response to that, so I took the silence as my cue. "I'm leaving," I said, feeling a tremor in my chest as I walked past her. "I can't do this. Not with you, not like this." Stepping outside again, I felt a rush of cool night air that almost lifted the weight off my shoulders. Igor was there, standing by the curb with his keys in hand. "You ready?" he asked gently. I nodded. We got in his car, and he pulled out of the lot. I stared into the side mirror, seeing the glowing lights from the venue recede behind us. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but at the same time a strange sense of relief uncoiled in my stomach. I hated hurting Alexandra. But what about how she had hurt me? We drove in near silence to my apartment. Once we got there, Igor patted me on the back and left me alone, respecting that I needed time to process. I walked inside, still dressed in the suit. I noticed how empty and cold the place felt. I thought I might break down sobbing, but I mostly just felt numb. Setting the crumpled vow pages on the table, I stared at them. So many words, so many heartfelt lines that I wrote in good faith. Now they existed as evidence of the chasm between us. Days and weeks passed. Alexandra reached out a few times through text messages, at first fuming with anger, accusing me of dramatic betrayal. Later, she sounded almost conciliatory. "We can try again," she wrote in one late-night text. "Maybe we rushed it." But nowhere did I see the words, "I'm sorry," or "I understand how you felt." It was always angled at how we might salvage the event, not at bridging the gap in our relationship or acknowledging her disregard for my perspective. Meanwhile, her mother apparently went around telling people I was cowardly and had abandoned Alexandra at the altar. Some of our mutual friends tried to remain neutral, but confusion was rampant. Everyone wanted a scapegoat for the fiasco. Quietly, I retreated. I told my parents what had happened in a halting, difficult conversation. My father, a man of few words, told me solemnly, "I'm proud you didn't let yourself be disrespected." My mother seemed torn between heartbreak that the wedding ended in disaster and relief that I stood up for myself. Gradually, I made peace with the thought that the woman I loved for 4 years had used my commitment as a stage to amplify her voice, with no space for my own. Sometimes at night, I'd still read through those vows, tears prickling at my eyes. I recalled how I'd spent entire nights crafting each sentence to convey exactly what she meant to me, and I realized that love demands reciprocity, an open hand that meets another open hand. It isn't about one person writing a script the other must follow. The memory of standing there, vow sheets in my sweaty palm, while her pre-recorded message overshadowed everything, remains one of the most painful moments of my life. She made me write vows I never got to say, and then she played a recording of her own instead, as if my voice didn't matter at all. In the end, I learned what might be the hardest lesson of all. A relationship can look perfect on the outside, but if one partner's voice is consistently drowned out, it will inevitably crumble under the weight of that imbalance. It took me leaving my own wedding reception to see it clearly. Maybe one day, Alexandra will realize that marriage is more than performance and control. Maybe she'll look at the pictures from that day and feel something close to regret. I can only guess. As for me, I'm carrying forward with the knowledge that love should never be a stage for just one performer. Whenever I think of the wedding day now, I remember the hush in the crowd as I tried to speak. That suffocating sensation of having no real space to share what was in my heart. The words I'd written in those vows remain in my drawer, unseen and unspoken, on the day they were meant, but at least I can say that in the aftermath, I found my own voice again. And that, fragile though it might be, feels more valuable than going through with a ceremony that was never going to honor both of us equally.